Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we are setting off on a grand, sweeping journey right back to the very dawn of human civilization. We're going to explore a time of monumental firsts, the first cities, the first writing, the first truly awe-inspiring engineering projects. But, as we'll see, the exact same things that allowed these ancient empires to rise up, well, they actually planted the seeds for their own devastating collapse.
So let's dive right into this central mystery. It's kind of this fascinating paradox, right? How did the brilliant minds of the ancient river valleys, societies that literally reshaped the earth and charted the stars, somehow engineer their own downfall? I mean, they hit these unprecedented technological peaks, yet those very same structures led to a completely tragic, devastating collapse. It's a story of remarkable innovation followed by a fatal dose of hubris. And honestly, there's just so much we can learn from it today.
Okay, here's our roadmap for today's journey. First, the Bronze Age boom. Second, engineering ancient marvels. Third, the social divide. Fourth, slavery and stagnation. And finally, the barbarian collapse. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The Bronze Age Boom, a surge of survival.
You know, early science wasn't just born in a vacuum. It was born out of absolute life-or-death necessity, a real surge of survival. Our explainer today is grounded in this brilliant historical analysis from the book Science and Civilization by Dr. Abd al-Azim Anis. What's so fantastic about this comprehensive study is how it connects all the dots between a society's economic needs, its social structure, and its scientific breakthroughs. Dr. Anis masterfully shows us how science and society shape each other, especially in the ancient river valleys of Egypt, Iraq, and India.
Looking at the big picture of human progress, for thousands of years during the Old Stone Age, humans were basically just surviving, right? Gathering and hunting. Then, the New Stone Age brought us early agriculture. But around 3000 BC, boom, we hit the Bronze Age, and this represents human history's very first industrial revolution. Suddenly, we've got complex irrigation, massive surplus food, and the birth of the first true cities. And with those cities came entirely new, incredibly complex problems that demanded real scientific solutions.
So, the crucial takeaway here is that abstract science had highly practical, muddy boots roots. Take mathematics, for example. Priests in early temples were suddenly receiving vast grain surpluses and herds of cattle as offerings. Counting on your fingers or making little notches on a stick just wasn't going to cut it anymore. The sheer volume of this surplus birthed written symbols and fractions, literally the dawn of mathematics. Meanwhile, farmers desperately needed to predict the deadly yet totally life-giving river floods. Over in Egypt, they noticed the star Sirius always appeared right before the Nile flooded. That desperate need for agricultural timing? That birthed astronomy and the 365-day solar calendar. Necessity truly was the mother of invention here.
Moving to Section 2, Engineering Ancient Marvels, Mastering the Elements.
With early scientific breakthroughs in math and astronomy locked in, humans started manipulating their environment on a scale that honestly is still awe-inspiring today. Just look at this incredible feat from early Egypt. According to historical records noted by Herodotus and highlighted in our source material, King Menes literally moved a river to unite Egypt. It's like watching an ancient mega-engineering documentary. Step 1, he builds these colossal dams to block the old path of the mighty Nile. Step 2, he actually digs an entirely new channel for the river to flow through. And Step 3, on the freshly dried and reclaimed land, he builds the legendary capital city of Memphis. The level of precision, the sheer confidence required to pull this off in the ancient world, it is just staggering.
And that momentum of Bronze Age innovation, it just exploded across Egypt and Mesopotamia. Let's rapid fire some of these marvels, because they are wild. King Snefru built a huge fleet of 60 seagoing ships to navigate the Red and Mediterranean seas. Over in Sumeria, they invented the wheeled cart, completely revolutionizing land transport forever. Back in Egypt, Amenemhat III constructed this enormous reservoir in Fayum to catch raging floodwaters and then slowly release them over 6 months for irrigation. And hey, let's not forget the sail. This was the very first time humanity harnessed a natural power other than human or animal muscle. It was an absolute golden age of practical engineering.
But this brilliantly illustrates the next big shift. Think about the sheer scale of ancient monumental architecture, like the immense temples and pyramids. You don't build these by having a few villagers casually working on the weekends. No way. Building these marvels required an unprecedented level of large-scale central organization. It required the birth of the state. But, as Dr. Anis points out in the text, in organizing hundreds of thousands of people to build these structures, society inadvertently planted the seeds of a deep, tragic inequality.
Which brings us to Section 3,
the social divide, the tragic flaw. Now we have to pivot in our narrative arc from the rise to the hubris. This vast agricultural surplus and the need for central organization completely fractured society into distinct, permanent classes. Let's break this divide down. On one side, you've got the ruling class, the kings, the priests, the scribes. Now, because they lived off the surplus produced by others, they had the free time to study theoretical science, astronomy, and math, but they were completely isolated from physical labor. Then, on the other side, you've got the working class, the farmers, the artisans, the slaves. They performed literally all the manual labor and knew the practical properties of materials, but they were entirely barred from learning to write or recording their scientific observations. The vital link between theoretical thought and practical technology was completely severed.
Section 4. Slavery and Stagnation. Progress grinds to a halt.
As these empires grew through conquest, the elite became increasingly reliant on a constant influx of enslaved prisoners of war, and this reliance would prove absolutely fatal to innovation. I love this anecdote from the source material because it perfectly captures the hubris of the era. A student once asked the great mathematician Euclid what the practical value of learning geometry actually was. Euclid was deeply offended that his pure, noble science would be associated with something as lowly as practical work. So he called to his servant and said, "Give him 3 coins, since he must make a profit from what he learns." That was the mindset. The ancient elite had utter contempt for practical application and getting their hands dirty.
So think about this. How many new labor-saving inventions does a society pursue when it has an endless, abundant supply of forced slave labor? 0. Literally 0. If you can just throw thousands of enslaved humans at a problem, whether it's milling grain or moving massive stones, there is absolutely no economic incentive for the brilliant minds of the era to invent machines like water mills or complex gears to do the work. Why invent a machine when you have free labor?
And here's the devastating result. Science without application becomes a stagnant ritual. Because the intellectuals flat out refused to test their theories in the mud and the dirt, science devolved. It just stopped moving forward. Astronomy turned into astrology. Medicine stagnated completely because the elite physicians wouldn't perform surgery. They considered that lowly butcher's work. Innovation ground to a total halt, and society became frozen in these repetitive, sterile traditions, totally devoid of practical progress.
And that leads to our final chapter, Section 5, The Barbarian Collapse, the Inevitable Fall.
A society just cannot remain frozen forever. This internal rot made these great ancient civilizations incredibly vulnerable to external threats. Let's look at the multi-step autopsy of their collapse. First, the ruling elite becomes completely isolated, living in absolute luxury but totally disconnected from reality. Second, the working masses and slaves are utterly impoverished and frankly have zero loyalty to the empire. Third, because of slavery and this intense elitism, technological innovation flatlines. And fourth, this is the kicker right here. The nomadic tribes living on the fringes of these empires, the people the elites called barbarians, begin to adopt the center's weapons, tools, and technology. The empires had essentially hollowed themselves out from the inside.
Which brings us to a dramatic climax. Those nomadic tribes out on the fringes, they weren't stagnant at all. They were incredibly adaptable. They took the center's technology, like the wheeled cart, and they weaponized it, creating the lightweight horse-drawn war chariot. Later, they would be the ones to adapt iron, while the old empires were still stubbornly clinging to bronze. Armed with the center's own adopted tech, these highly mobile, motivated fringe groups easily swept in and toppled the stagnant, rotting empires of the ancient river valleys. The fringes conquered the center using the center's own tools.
It's such an incredible, cyclical story of history, isn't it? They rose up through brilliant, practical problem solving, but they fell because their social structure caused them to look down on the very labor that built them in the first place. Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder today. If a society stops valuing the hands that build it and completely severs that tie between theory and practice, can its progress ever truly survive? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope you found this dive into the source material as fascinating as I did. Keep learning, keep asking those big questions, and we will catch you next time.